Welcome to the Octavius Gould Experience, and I am your host, Octavius Gould. I have the pleasure of having on as a guest a friend, a former colleague of, what did we figure out, Joe, 31 years ago?
That's right.
Joe Patton. Joe, welcome to my podcast episode.
Thank you, Octavius. I appreciate it. I'm very excited about this. It's been a long time since we caught up, and I've been watching you from afar. I'm pretty excited about this.
Well, we followed one another on LinkedIn ever since the inception of LinkedIn. So I've been watching you from afar as well. And I was just really excited to have you on because you're someone that when we met at MCI, you were already in management. I was an inside sales representative wanting to be a manager. And one of the things that someone told me early in my career, Joe, was figure out who is doing it well and find those mentors, the people to go to ask the questions and take something from everyone. And you were one of those individuals that I just had tremendous respect for. And although I never reported to you, I can remember getting advice from you and just having conversations. So for me, it's really exciting to have you on because I know this was 30 years ago and what you were telling me then must be incredible how you're leading people today. So thank you for
Well,
being on.
no, thank you. I appreciate that. Iron sharpens iron, my friend.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll get into the one problem I have with you when we talk about your educational background
Okay.
and you being a Georgia Bulldog. But for the purpose of giving my audience insight into your impressive background and why they should take whatever you say to heart, I just want to give everyone some insight into your background. I
Okay.
mentioned that you're a Bulldog because you got your MBA at Georgia,
Go dogs.
but you got your undergrad where my oldest daughter is attending Georgia State University in Atlanta, right?
Well, yes,
Okay, okay,
sort of. I mean, just for clarity, I didn't get my undergrad there, but I did attend there, and I was on the swim team there many, many years ago.
okay,
Yes.
awesome, awesome. One of the things that impressed me before I talk about your background is that you took a route very similar to myself. You actually went back to school and got your MBA as an adult. And I definitely want to touch on that as it relates to what that experience was like and how it helped you as a leader to go back so many years after getting into corporate America and really being able to leverage those real life business experiences. But let's get into this impressive career. So you started at MCI. That's where we met. Joe and I, we actually met in an 800 plus person call center in Atlanta. One of the greatest experience of my life because although it was a telemarketing center, the one thing that I quickly learned, there were some true professionals, some talented people who all now are very successful, whether they're an entrepreneur leading their own business or a senior leader executive like yourself in corporate America. The talent in that building was just remarkable. And then from MCI, Joe went over to Global Crossing, where he was a director of alternate channels, indirect leadership, XO Communications, a senior manager of wholesale, um, Progress Telecom slash level three. And then you got into executive leadership at Fiberlight as an executive vice president of sales and marketing. And then as a senior vice president of sales at Global Capacity. And now, if I'm correct, after skipping over a few very impressive organizations that you were in senior leadership, you're now the chief revenue officer at Lightsource Communications. Impressive career, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know how impressive it is. I think it's more luck and to your earlier point, mentorship. I've had a lot of really good mentors along the way and believe that, seeking that help as you grow in your career is really important and not thinking that you have it all figured out yourself because I guarantee you don't.
It's very true. One of the things I think about are days at MCI, people who are, coming up in the ranks of leadership today, they would have no clue what MCI was at that particular time. They probably think it's the bus with MCI on front of it. But
Right,
at the time, MCI was the second largest telecommunications company in America, number two to AT&T. And as I
right.
reflect on that great organization and everything I've learned over my career that I contribute or attribute back to MCI, looking back at your early career at MCI, Joe, what leadership lessons did you learn there that you carried forward into your executive leadership even today?
Sure. So first of all, MCI was a fantastic training ground for so many, as you have mentioned. Folks have gone on to do some pretty special things. I can remember Mike Cerrone and so many different names that came in and they kind of modeled the type of leadership that I felt was appropriate and good.
Mm-hmm.
They added a lot of excitement to the business place. MCI was second to AT&T because MCI was the disruptor of the monopoly that was AT&T, right? So we
Right.
were a company built on kind of entrepreneurship values and experiences, and so it was interesting. There was a lot of fun to be had, but a lot of hard work, and hard work was certainly rewarded, and with a lot of fun and a lot of money. So it was a really good time to be there, and you got to see some poor examples of leadership
Mm-hmm.
at times, unfortunately, but you also got to see some real great leaders.
Right.
And when you're in a group of, like you said earlier, 800 people and multiple levels of management, you get a chance to really view a myriad of styles and
Mm-hmm.
performances. And I was a competitor. I was a swimmer in college. I also played some soccer, and I was always very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And MCI was built, in a competitive system.
Right.
And so uh, I wanted to learn from the best, just like
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about. And I think I did. I think I learned a lot from a lot of really good people. And the way to do that is really be open-minded and
Right.
not think that you have all the answers, and really just become a sponge,
Mm-hmm.
and be in a constant learning state.
Yeah. You mentioned being a swimmer in college.
Yeah.
What did you take away from your sports career that
Mm.
helped you climb the corporate ladder once you got into business?
Well, I'll tell you, one thing is I wouldn't do swimming in college over again. 5 a.m. practices, 4 hours a day, either in the pool, on land, or in the weight room, and a lot of practices. And swimming is not the sport where a lot of people come to watch you. So it's really and I was a distance swimmer, which made it
Okay.
even worse because, when you're swimming a mile, nobody watches that, right? Everybody's watching the speed races. But anyway, but what I did take from it is that you just don't ever give up,
Hmm.
right? And you practice as hard as you race, because if you let up in practice, you'll let up in a race. And especially being a long distance swimmer, I learned that um, you know people may start fast,
Hmm.
but if they don't have the right pace, if they don't have that stick-to-itiveness, then they'll peter out before the end. And many of my races started out where I wasn't I wasn't last. I'm just saying, but I wasn't at the front.
Right.
But I had a good pace about me, and I just never gave up. And
Hmm.
so I fortunately had a lot of wins in my career. Now I wasn't swimming at the highest level. Georgia State was not on the same level as University of Florida and Georgia and all those schools. But for the division that I swam in, we did pretty well.
That's awesome. You talk about what was it, 5 a.m. getting up for practice?
Oh yeah, every day.
Yeah, that's discipline that I'm quite
Yes,
sure, on top of what you've said, is something that you've had to tap into, whether it was early in your career or even as an executive leader today, correct?
that's absolutely correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
discipline's important for
Yeah.
sure.
Joe, when you reflect back on your MCI days, what leadership lessons that you learned then that over the course of 30 years is still remaining true? Because, our business environment has changed, but there are some lessons that I'm quite sure you took away from MCI that you still teach others to be a great leader today. What would those be?
Most definitely. Get personal with the people that work for you and with you.
Mhm.
I mean, it's really important to know those. And I've been in environments where I was in charge of all of the revenue of a company, and I won't mention them, but where the ownership of the company couldn't even tell you if I was married, had kids, where I lived, or anything like that. Yet I was still in charge of all of their revenue. That was way back in the day, so nobody try to guess who it was. Um, but bottom line is get to know who is working for you. Get to know them personally, what they like, what they don't like, what motivates them. The old "what's your why" thing, right? It's
Right.
real. Understanding
Hmm.
why you're there, what your purpose is, and then as a leader, being able to feed those purposes. And I'll give you a very quick anecdote. When I moved to Wichita, Kansas, to become a manager in the call center in Wichita after
Hmm.
Atlanta, um, we're in a very different environment. Atlanta was very young, professional, and very
Hmm.
motivated by money. I mean, you remember the reports? They'd say, "Hey, if you make two more sales, you'll make another $150 or whatever," right? That wasn't working in Wichita, Kansas. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of these guys were making more money already than their parents because
Mm.
their parents were working on farms and such. Awesome, salt of the earth people. I love the people in Wichita, but it took a different motivator, right? So this is going to sound silly, but I bought a little, 1 foot tall bulldog and called it the top dog prize. And I used their pride and their competitiveness.
Hmm.
That sat on the desk of the winner every month that we changed quotas, right? You remember
Hmm.
that too.
Oh, yes.
But, and that motivated our team. We were number one in the country very quickly at a
Hmm.
brand new center as a
Hmm.
brand new manager, just simply focused on what motivated the team, right? And these individuals were fantastic people, just like they were everywhere else I worked. But I just needed to know what motivated them and really got to know them and not
Hmm.
just count them as, you know, uh, MCI did a great job of using technology as the workhorse and people as royalty,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so, I learned that at MCI, and I think I carry that through. The servant leadership. I've got that on my LinkedIn profile because I thought I truly believe in it,
Hmm.
um, and I don't want to promote myself as some great whatever, but I do believe that servant leadership is sustainable
Hmm.
and long term. You can get a lot out of people by just forcing and applying pressure and stuff in short term,
Right.
but that's not sustainable. It doesn't build a good business. It builds a good outcome for short term, possibly.
I agree so much with you. Joe, when you think about those days at MCI to being an executive leadership today, what does good leadership mean to you today? And how has that definition changed for you over the years?
It's become a little harder today.
Mhm.
Everybody's looking at spreadsheets. A lot of companies are owned by private investors or investment firms
Mhm.
that really don't. Anyway, they focus on the spreadsheet and the results,
Right.
and the results are critically important. But focusing on removing obstacles from your employees, equipping them to be successful is the same as it was then as it is now, though everything seems to be escalated or elevated as far as the focus on the spreadsheet, right?
Right.
And the statistics. And it's interesting, we'll get into it when we talk about education, but I learned that in my MBA as well, is
Mhm.
that, first of all, I used to blow off statistics. I used to think statistics were stupid, right? And there is a saying, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So you can make statistics say whatever you want them to, right? But there is some importance in the data.
Right.
Uh, you need to use that data and develop an understanding of your team,
Hmm.
understanding of the people that work for you, and know whether or not they're doing the right things to ultimately get to where you want to be. It depends on the sales cycles. If you're transactional, you're selling transactional deals, you can judge your success on a daily basis, right?
Hmm.
If it's longer term, that's the type of business I'm in with selling to large enterprises and wholesale customers. The sales cycles are significantly longer. And so you really have to pay attention to the leading indicators instead of the lagging indicator, which is the sale, right?
Got you. Got you. As 5 minutes ago, you mentioned the word purpose. As someone who, especially post-pandemic, has led teams across different cities and even industries, how do you create alignment and shared purpose within your team?
That's a really good question because not all companies have the culture
Hmm.
gives that purpose from the top down. Carry their purpose, their mission forward. And you have to define that as a company. Who do we want to be and why? Okay, so you need to define that at the highest level and then let that permeate downwards versus, having your middle management or even your employee, the line employees kind of create their own culture and push that up because that's a disaster waiting to happen,
Right.
right? If your leadership doesn't believe in the culture, doesn't believe in the mission the way you do, and or the employees don't believe in the mission the way you do, then that's a problem, and you got to fix that. Culture is absolutely critical in in that.
Yeah. One of the things about telecommunications, and you experienced this, I'm quite sure in your career, we dealt with a lot of change, right?
Oh,
I,
yes,
I think the going joke was MCI meant many changes instantly.
that's exactly right. Yes,
How
that's
how do you guide teams and organizations as an executive leader through uncertainty, especially in the different high high speed industries that are constantly changing that you've
yeah.
been in?
Yeah, I think through care and transparency,
Mhm.
you have to, and understanding, you have to understand the reason for the changes. You have to be transparent about your feeling about the changes with your employees and what they should expect from the organization and any
Mhm.
changes you're making. I mean, we've been through times where we've had to downsize,
Mhm.
and I'm a pretty emotional person, and frankly, I at one point I had to lay off 48 people,
Wow.
and they had to be, and they were in multiple cities, and I
Mhm.
got pretty emotional with them,
Mhm.
because I cared about each and every one of them,
Mhm.
and it's not easy, but you have to let people understand the why behind things and be
Right.
transparent, and you got to care for them. I've also found, particularly in sales, nobody should ever lose their job without believing it's coming already,
Mhm.
right? For performance reasons. If they're not
Right.
performing, then they should already know, that they're, vulnerable, if you will. But
Mhm.
some changes are thrown upon us without warning.
Mhm.
Like let's talk about the pandemic, right? COVID was a dramatic change for
Right.
so many people. One thing we did is we tried to remain consistent,
Okay.
and I continued to stay on the road. I continued to go meet with my employees. They continued to try to make appointments with customers. We did mask up. We were respectful of
Mhm.
the rules of society at the time.
Right.
But we tried very hard to keep everything consistent through the change. But we did acknowledge and discuss openly the challenges that brought. And I'll give you another anecdote. My wife runs a school for children with dyslexia that I happen to be on the board of.
Okay.
And I was amazed at the way they handled the pandemic.
Mhm.
They made the students then had to learn from home. They couldn't come into the personal environment, right?
Okay.
So they had to do school from home. Now, we had a son that was in school at a different private school, and it was field day for him every day. I mean,
Mhm.
they told him, "Hey, you got to study this or whatever." Anyway, it was just
Right.
a my wife, and this is full credit to her. She had the students, they had to dress in their uniforms every morning, just like they were going to the school.
Mm.
They kept the exact same schedule. So there was
Okay.
no lessened schedule,
Mhm.
and the parents still had to be involved. And so it was very regimented, even
Right.
through COVID. And our students did fantastically well. They didn't miss a beat.
Mhm.
So kudos to her. And so I think, change, like you said, transparency,
Mhm.
care, and consistency are the things I would say are most important there.
Yeah, hats off to your wife because at the time I had a senior in high school and my youngest daughter was in middle school, and I can just recall the changes that they were going through, them as well as their friends. And I wonder the impact that the pandemic will have on our children 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Right.
Yeah. So
They're
hats
pretty
off.
resilient people. I'm hoping it's not too deep of an impact, but
Mhm.
I don't know if you'd call it fairness or whatever. The thing about the
Mhm.
pandemic is it affected everyone the same.
Right, right.
So anybody using the pandemic as an excuse that just has to look around and see if other people have the same excuse or if it's,
Mhm.
a personal problem.
Yeah, Joe, one of the things that I realized dealing with the ebbs and flows of entrepreneurship as a business owner in 2001 during 9/11 was the first time that I faced a level of uncertainty as a business owner
Hmm.
due to 9/11. And I wasn't prepared for that. I was
Right,
prepared for the pandemic, not necessarily for the medical impact of the pandemic, but just for the downturn of the economy and how I had to shift as a business owner just from those lessons that I took away from 9/11, those hard lessons from 9/11.
yes,
One of the things that I did was slow down for the first time. And instead of just stopping, I slowed down enough to peel back the onion, to learn more about myself, to learn more about business, to enhance my business acumen, and use that time to build processes and strategies that I otherwise would not have because I was always on the go. What do you
right.
think you took away from that downtime that is guiding you today and helping you be even more successful?
Yeah, that's a good question too, and a nice reflection. Thank you. So, yeah, 9/11 affected me greatly as well. I was across the river from the Pentagon at a conference
Wow.
when it happened, and I remember just feeling terribly sick to my stomach
Mhm.
as I drove my rental car that was supposed to be returned at Dulles an
Mhm.
airport, and I drove it all the way back to the Atlanta airport pick up my vehicle,
Mhm.
and just reflecting all the way down, right? But that, and unfortunately, sometimes it takes a tragedy to help us reflect as what's important, right?
Right.
And I think a couple things. One, finding balance,
Mhm.
right? We're young, we're eager, we're all ready to go, and we're willing to
Mhm.
work our fingers to the bone. Part of that comes from the previous generation where our parents worked so hard
Mhm.
and didn't really seek balance the way they should have.
Right.
Uh, and so that spilled into our lives. Part of it was the technologies pushing us to do things faster, better all the time.
Mhm.
And so, taking time to, as you said, reflect, take a breath, really think strategically versus tactically, um, and giving yourself time to do that is important.
Mhm.
And some people put that on their calendars and block off time for that. Other people do it, intermittently. I don't necessarily block it off on my calendar, but I do know when and part of that's just, age, is realizing, things a little bit better than you used to.
Right.
But I do feel when I'm getting in the weeds tactically, and I need to just step back and take a breath and really reflect and think about, okay, what's the strategy here? Is it really in line with what my actions are, or are my
Mhm.
actions in line with my strategy? And is it the right way to go? And you have to always test, right? You always
Right.
test, make sure that what you're doing is going to benefit the company you're working for.
Yeah. When you reflect on some of the different organizations you've been a part of, Joe, what practices would you say you found most effective in building high trust, high accountability cultures? Because the one thing I remember about you is that you're a guy who garnered a lot of trust, but you also held your team accountable.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just think honesty, being honest,
Hmm.
with your feelings and not being afraid of the hard discussions,
Hmm.
and showing that care. It's kind of a recurring theme.
Right.
And again, whatever your goals are, if they're, hey, let's just get a quick 6 months out of this person, and then we'll find somebody else to get 6 months out of. There's some companies that might do that. I believe in sustainable long-term relationships and business. And so, yeah, I think just being honest and sharing, but honest doesn't mean be mean, right? So, unfortunately, we've had to let a lot of people go in the sales
Right.
arena. And, you just have to show care while you're having those conversations, but don't hold back on the conversations. A good mentor of mine, a former CEO that I worked for,
Hmm.
says bad news doesn't get better with time.
Hmm.
And that is so true.
Right.
So, if you come up across a bad situation or bad news, share it caringly, but share it and involve the other person or
Hmm.
people in the solution,
Right.
right? Don't just think you have all the answers and dictate what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Use the force of many minds to come up with a solution.
That is so true because so many leaders at all levels, front line all the way up to the C-suite, practice avoidance when it comes to
Yeah.
conflict, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Can you, as successful as you've been in your career, share a moment with my audience, Joe, where a leadership conversation or a leadership moment didn't go well and what that taught you?
You
I have
really want
many.
me to say?
Yeah, I have many.
Well, the first one that came to mind was MCI, actually. It was the most scared and the most spoiled I was. Actually, there's several there. I've stumbled so many times along this path, right? And I still stumble today, but it's just making sure you're aware of your failures and how to leverage fixes to them.
Exactly.
But yeah, I was a newly uh, uh, employed manager, right? I
Mhm.
was on the phones as a sales rep, and I got
Uh-huh.
promoted after failing 3 times to be promoted, where I went through the whole interview process. And
Wow.
fortunately, one of my mentors was Pat Hamlet. I don't know if you remember her.
Yes,
She was a manager at MCI,
I
and
do.
I kept trying to become a manager. And the second time I interviewed, I didn't get it. And I went to her and I said, Pat, what am I doing wrong? And she gave me a few things to work on. And so
Mhm.
the third time I went to interview, I said, hey, last time I interviewed with y'all, and it's a panel, right? Super scary for a young guy. Um, uh, I said, you gave me these items to work on. Said these were the things, the roadblocks to keeping me from
Right,
management. And so this is what I've done to overcome each. And I made sure I documented everything I did on each one
right.
throughout my time, and I got promoted. Well, so I thought I'd made it, right? Oh no. So the first thing that happened was 3 guys on my team. So it's a
Mhm.
team of what, 16 we had.
Yes, yes.
3 of the guys on my team were all really good friends with each other, not with me.
Okay.
Uh, and they were very large. They were much bigger than me, and I'm not a small guy, but these guys were big. And one of them approached me and was literally looking down at me and said, "You don't deserve this position." He had tried for it as well. And I said, "Whoa," and I'm standing up with 16 people in a bay sitting down, and he stood up and confronted me. And so, I fortunately, my dad taught me how to deal with situations like this. And I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to ask you to sit down too so we can have this conversation." Because
Right,
I was feeling
right,
very threatened. So he
right.
sat down, I sat down. I said, "You're probably right. I don't deserve this. But I can tell you this, I will give you every bit of my energy to prove you and I wrong and make the best solution here we can." And so, that was one where I was scared to death. And I still continued to make mistakes, and again, still today, but just acknowledging them and figuring out better ways to do things on a constant learning basis, I think is the key.
Joe, that is too funny. I've I've had one experience like that, but I was 6 feet two, maybe 30-ish at the time. He was 5'10", maybe 5'9". Wet, he would have been 150. So I wasn't threatened, but I was concerned about covering the backside of the organization. One of the
Right.
things MCI used to teach us, make sure you do what's in the best interest of the organization. So I knew, regardless of how upset he got, to the point where he tossed my desk over,
Oh,
I had to maintain a level of emotional intelligence, even though I didn't know what emotional intelligence was at that
right.
time at age 26. But it was my only one experience of having someone challenge me. But it's interesting because it goes back to what you said at the beginning of our conversation that I had to reflect on. And I use this in coaching conversations. I don't necessarily know that I kept him up to speed and abreast as it relates to where he was in his sales process.
Mm.
We were doing the corrective action type of thing, but it's one thing to put a person on a written warning and not hold yourself accountable as a young leader to support that person, right? We called it a PIP, not Gladys Knight in the PIPs, but a
Right.
performance
That's
improvement
right.
plan, right? So as a leader, we
Right.
had to take ownership in
That,
part of that performance improvement. And I don't necessarily know that I did that well, a lesson that I took with me as I grew and matured in my leadership.
for sure.
Yeah. You know, you talked about earlier, you touched on the fact that you went back to earn your MBA at that school that I mentioned. And I don't even know if I can mention it on my podcast, the University of Georgia, but
Go dogs.
I will give you all much respect
Go dogs.
because it is definitely the premier program and one of the premier programs in college football, as you well know. What motivated you to go back as an adult to earn your MBA, and how has that aided you as an executive leader right now today?
Yeah, truth be told, my wife was a big motivating factor. She's an educator well, she's a speech and language pathologist, but she founded that school and has, education's always been very high on her priority list, where it wasn't on mine when I was in my undergrad. I could care less. I was about swimming and have fun and playing soccer and all those things. Um, but as I grew in my career and I realized, what's my end game here, right? Do I just retire and then ride off into the sunset, or I've got a lot of, I think, knowledge and passion for teaching and helping other people, but also helping organizations. And so I wanted to sit on some boards, and I've sat on a few boards, smaller boards, nonprofit boards, and such. But I would like to continue work after retirement on a board level. And so I felt like my MBA would be beneficial in doing that. And it was a test of whether or
Mhm,
not I really could survive that program.
mhm.
Like I said earlier, I was a terrible student. I didn't care about school at the time.
Right.
And now I'm paying a whole lot of money out of my personal pocket to attend school. I'm a little bit wiser now than I was when I was younger.
Mhm.
I wish the undergrad would have been as collaborative as the MBA was because, that's my kind of learning style.
Mhm.
There's a Harvard professor, his last name's Rose. He was on the Mike Rowe podcast,
Okay.
and Mike was asking him, in high school he had a 0.9 GPA,
Ooh,
and
brutal.
he somehow talked his way into being in the honors program at this small school as a provisional
Mhm.
because they did collaborative learning spaces versus, read a book, regurgitate, and test, right?
Right.
And so he is now a Harvard professor. And that motivated me a bit, but that was after I got my MBA. I heard it just a couple weeks ago, and I was like,
Okay.
how fascinating is that? But it ties to my story because I wasn't confident.
Mhm.
I didn't think I could do it. The further I got in my career and realized, hey, I do belong in some of these, I had imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
probably from that very first management job I got where I was being told by my employee that I didn't belong there. And,
Joe,
stuff
not to interrupt you, but I'm trying to figure out who that was.
I you know who it was. I won't. We'll do that offline.
Exactly.
He was a very large man, and I was scared to death. But anyway, um, and a good guy. Ended up being a
Okay.
really great guy, and he even came up to me and said, "Hey, man, I just want to let you know I read you wrong. You're doing a good job."
That's
So that
awesome.
meant a lot to me.
That's
Um,
awesome.
but anyway, going back to the MBA, it was to challenge myself.
Right.
I don't ever want to be complacent. I've been there. I've been
Hmm.
complacent or, kind of middle career where, I'd reached what I thought was the highest I could ever go. And I just became a little complacent. And I didn't like that feeling
Right.
because I always, felt like I was meant for more.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I love that. When you think about earning that MBA, and first of all, congratulations. That's
thank you.
actually what motivated me to invite you on as a guest because I saw the LinkedIn post that you put out there just maybe 2, 3 months ago. Because I think you
Right.
got your earned your MBA
In
in
May.
May of
Yeah.
2025 this year. So I was just highly impressed because so often you hear professionals talking today that education isn't overly important. And there's a debate out there whether or not people should go get their undergrad. There's a debate whether or not it's worth it to get an MBA. What would you say to professionals today, Joe, who are at a crossroads? They're trying to figure out in life, whether they're in their 30s, 40s, or 50s like us, is it worth it?
Good question. So I still ask my question myself that question, whether or not it was worth it, and we'll see over time, I guess. From a pride standpoint, I'd say yes.
Mhm.
But, I have 5 children, all very bright, very wonderful children. Uh, my oldest son never went to college, didn't want to, had nothing to do with school. He
Mhm.
hated it, and he's doing just fine. He's a fireman paramedic for Hall County,
Mhm.
and he's also got a construction business on the side that he's doing really well with. So
Mhm.
I'm very proud of him. I've got I won't tell you all my kids, but one of my sons went through UGA, got his undergrad and his master's all the same. They call him a double dog. And he started his career with Cox Communications as a business
Mhm.
analyst and has since grown and is a senior analyst and head of a particular finance project for a different company, not
Mhm.
Cox. Um, and doing very well. And they're all stretched out in there. I've got them.
Mhm.
I won't, like I said, bore you with all of their stories, but I think it depends on the individual. I I I don't believe college is for everybody,
Mhm.
but I do believe that depending on what you want to do in life, learning is particularly important. So whether you go to an institution, a school, a tech school, or
Mhm.
just dive into your career, you have to learn. You have to learn the ins and outs. You have to learn, become a product matter expert, You know, they
Mhm.
say subject matter expert. You need to be, whether you're in sales or not, you need
Right.
to know the product. You need to know how your customer experience is. You need to be dedicated to learning ongoing what other companies are doing better than your company. How
Mhm.
can you adopt some of those practices to become a better company? And really be dedicated to educating yourself, whether it's a formal education or not.
Right.
Um, I do find value in a formal education. I'm not one of those that says you're wasting your money,
Mhm.
um, unless you're not going to apply it.
Right.
There's a lot of really smart
Mhm.
people out there that don't apply themselves. There's a
Right.
lot of geniuses that either don't know how to apply themselves,
Mhm.
and maybe school would have helped them, um, or they do know how to apply themselves, but they're just plain lazy. I don't know. There's a lot of, they're not motivated because they're in the
Right.
wrong fit. They're not doing the job that they really should be doing. I mean, there's a lot of different variables there, but
Mhm.
it is important to fully educate yourself along the way, for
Yeah.
sure.
Joe, I want to backtrack us for a bit because you said something that was really profound earlier when you were talking about the approach you took after facing rejection of getting that management promotion multiple times.
Hmm.
What advice can you give to professionals out there, regardless of their chosen field of endeavor, who face rejection? They didn't get that promotion. In many cases, they did not even receive feedback, so they weren't able to ascertain why they
Right.
weren't qualified to get the promotion. What advice would you give individuals to empower them and inspire them to keep going and keep trying?
I would say don't be a victim.
Mhm.
It's on your shoulders. I mean, nobody's going to give you anything. You haven't earned anything. I don't care if you got your MBA or not. You don't earn anything without going and getting after it yourself. It's really important to be your own self advocate and to never give up, to compete and
Mhm.
believe in what you're doing. If you're doing a job, I don't know if you remember, Les Brown came and spoke at MCI with us. Les
Oh, I
Brown is one
remember.
of my, I used to listen to Les Brown every day on my way into work. Every single
Mhm.
day, I'd pop his tape in. And when we hired him, I had a little bit of starstruck. I saw him and I was like, and I walked up to him and I meant to say, Les, I'm your biggest fan. And I said, I was so nervous. I said, Les, I'm your biggest friend. And I mean, fan. And he just gave that big barrel chuckle and said, we can be friends too. And he gave me a big hug. And but he said, and I don't know if you'll remember this, but he said, I'd rather fail at what I love than succeed at what I hate.
Yes,
And the
yes.
next morning, my top sales rep came in and quit.
Mhm.
He said, first of all, he left his wife.
Mhm.
That next day, he left his wife and came in and
Wow.
quit MCI and said, "I'd rather fail at what I love than succeed at what I make." And I'm thinking,
Wow.
okay, that backfired. That wasn't what. But I'll bet he's a happier person and
Right.
probably more successful now because he followed what he really wanted to do versus what he had to do, right? And that's the previous generation, my
Mhm.
parents, your parents. They did
Right.
what they had to do, right?
Right.
We have a little bit of balance there and get to do what we love to do
Mhm.
and what we have to do. The
Mhm.
generation right now seems to be really focused on what they love to do and not as much about what they have to do.
Right.
And that's not true of all people in that generation. Please don't get me
Right.
wrong, but
Right.
there seems to be a little bit more of that. And I've got a little envy for them, but the difference is when with an employer's cycle, meaning there's a lot of people looking for a job, but not a lot of jobs, then that shifts, right?
Right.
Right, and when there's a, a shortage of workers, then you'll pull in anybody, right? So they can name their own terms and they can quit and go get another job and all that stuff. So I think we're seeing a little bit of, and it's cautionary for the younger people to have the attitude of doing the best they can and being introspective, like you were saying, and really reflecting on themselves and holding themselves accountable to doing the best they can do in all of those scenarios because they're going to be the ones with a job when there's not as many jobs for all the employees, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. two more questions for you, Joe, because I
Yes, sir.
know my audience, they're probably on the edge of their seat with all the gems that you are dropping. What would you say, or what advice would you give to emerging leaders who want to lead with impact versus leading with title?
Huh. Well, I don't know if you can teach that. I maybe, and maybe you got to listen,
Right.
right? And that's probably the most valuable skill is being able to listen
Hmm.
and not just hear, but listen and
Right.
understand what you're hearing and use that and to marinate and build the recipe for your own success.
Hmm.
But if you think you can't, you have to have an open mind. You can't come into something and think you have all the answers and, you know, disregard
Hmm.
uh, people and their suggestions, no matter how silly they might sound at times.
Right.
Um, because, you know, when I was a young leader, well, I was scared the whole time. So, like I said, I had imposter syndrome. So, I think there's some value in that. There's a book. Well, you got the Good to Great, which is a
Hmm.
pretty good book. There's another one called Firms of Endearment, which is very similar to Good to Great,
Okay.
but it goes on a little deeper about the persona of the leaders.
Hmm.
And it really talks about the sustainable, successful leaders
Right.
are those that care and those that are less narcissistic, if you will, and really brings it back to servant leadership.
Joe, every sales professional who gets into leadership, because not every sales professional wants or covets to be a leader, as we
Right.
know, but the ones who do get into leadership covet to be a senior vice president of sales, then
Mhm.
ultimately that chief revenue officer that you've earned. Talk to me about what it's like being a chief revenue officer, some of those responsibilities, and then do me a favor, end with all the great things that you all are doing at Light Source Communications.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I'll talk about light source here in a little bit, but um, yeah, I think the higher you go, the more responsibility you have.
Mhm.
I think who sings that song? One is the loneliest number. Um, the buck stops with you when you're at the top, right? And so it's important to surround yourself with good people.
Mhm.
But you know, and don't get ahead of yourself. Don't think you're all that, right? I think that's a recurring theme in this conversation as well. But your responsibilities expand. You've got to delegate. You've got to trust in the people that are working for you,
Mhm.
and really push the responsibility. There's another book. It's by General McChrystal, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but he was in charge of the Desert Storm, I think. But he talked about it's called Team of Teams,
Okay.
and he talked about solving problems where they originate, not at the top, right? So he talked about
Mhm.
we were losing the war, if anybody can believe that, which I do. We
Mhm.
were losing the war because when the troops were finding a scenario, they would have to radio it up to their command, say,
Mhm.
"Hey, we got this scenario, we need help," blah blah blah. They would radio it up, and then get to the Pentagon, and they'd finally make a decision. And by the time it got back here, the whole scenario had changed.
Right.
And so he saw that with his wisdom, he saw that and he pushed it back down and said, decisions are made at the field level now.
Mhm.
We are going to train our people properly and we are
Mhm.
going to trust them to make good decisions. And when a mistake is made, we're not going to chop heads. We're going to use that as a teaching moment. And you got to allow people to make mistakes in order to learn, right? So you delegate. That's a really important part. People appreciate when they have responsibility,
Right.
right? If you hold all the responsibility at your level, then animosity sets in. So you've got to push that down and show them that they're a part of the big picture, right? So taking it to Light Source, I tell you, we're an entrepreneurial company. We're founded
Mhm.
by Pete and Deborah, and they did an amazing job building our company to where they were able to add some more leadership in. And we're right at that cusp. We've got some really fun stuff going on. We build fiber networks. we own and operate them and support the hyperscale community with those. So, I can't say who our customers are, but you'll
Hmm.
know the hyperscaler
Okay.
scale community. So data center to data center in support of AI and all the wonderful technology that's coming out. I mean, I was just talking to my wife the other day. She says it's time for you to get a new car. And I'm like, I don't know, because a gas-fed car is going to become the way of the dodo bird at some point. We're all going to be taking rides in electric cars, and some of them we won't even own. You may
Hmm.
not even need a car. I went in a Waymo for the very first time a few months back.
Hmm.
Phoenix is covered in Waymos, and that's
Hmm.
that's basically Uber with no driver, right?
Wow.
It's owned by Google,
Okay.
and it was fascinating. A Jaguar pulls up with all kinds of sensors and cameras and stuff, and I get in, and I was nervous, um, but it was very comfortable.
Hmm.
It was a great experience, and so you can't stop progress. You can't
Right.
stop technology. It's going to happen. We've got to embrace it. And Light Source is really building the infrastructure to be able to support all that fun stuff and
Hmm.
technology that's coming up. And like Superman says, with great responsibility, no, with great power comes great responsibility. The prayer is that all this technology sits in the hands of the good, not the bad, because we know what bad can do with it. And I don't
Absolutely.
get preachy here, but I really believe that. And for all the young professionals coming up, it's really important. Don't lose sight of the big picture.
Hmm.
Don't get caught up in your own journey, that you're not focused on other people and the big picture as to how it affects humanity more important now than ever, because technology is getting to where it could really affect humanity in a interesting way. And it
Well
depends on
said.
where, right? So.
Well said. So, Joe, how can my audience get in touch with you or Light Source Communications?
Well, lscfiber.com is our website.
Okay.
Yeah, you can hit a contact button, and that'll get to me and get to our company as well. We're on LinkedIn. That's about it for social media right
Okay.
now. But I'm just J Patton at lscfiber.com, and would love to hear from anybody that wants to chat about, anything really. I'm
Awesome.
here to help mentor and pass it down. So, and if you're a user of dark fiber, because that's what we sell, is dark fiber and
Mhm.
conduit and such, I would love to hear from you and be able to show you how we can help support your missions going forward.
Absolutely. Joe, I am so appreciative, and we're a couple days before Thanksgiving. So I'm
Yeah.
thankful for having this conversation and just having the opportunity to catch up with someone who I admired 31 years ago. And like we said at the beginning of this podcast episode, followed from afar. Your journey is impressive. Many times I've connected people to you on social media, on LinkedIn, and said, hey, here's someone you want to talk to that is based in Atlanta who may be able to at least give you some advice. And I know one person in particular circled back to me and they had a great conversation with you and they said
Oh,
he's
nice.
exactly who you said he was. So thank you. So for the purposes of my audience, please hit like, share, and follow my podcast because I am hopeful to have more great guests on like Joe Patton, who I just think is a better person than even being a great leader. So thank you for joining us today, Joe.
Thank you, Octavius. I really appreciate it, man. It's so good to see you. I'm excited about following you as well.
Hey, I look forward to seeing how your Bulldogs do in the playoffs.